Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Superman Returns from 2006. Cinematically, in at the time of this film's release, the only time we had all seen Superman on the big screen was the Christopher Reeves Superman. I know there were serials and there's a compilation film of the serials, but let's be real here, people. Like, for most people, when you think of a movie with Superman from 1978, I think, up until this, and even during this movie, you thought of Christopher Reeves. So it was going to be very hard to do anything with the character not related to Christopher Reeves, because I grew up with Christopher Reeves as Superman. When he had his accident, I remember exactly where I was. Christopher Reeves as Superman was a big deal, 100%. So, in a sense, I understand why Bryan Singer, who had a lot of nostalgia for the Christopher and loved the Christopher Reeve Superman, and that the public would be willing to accept a movie that sort of takes place in the universe of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, even though Christopher Reeves, I believe, had died at the time, and obviously because of his accident couldn't be Superman, and it makes sense that people would want that kind of a Superman. But this film doesn't really make a lot of sense in that. The idea of Superman Returns is it takes place 5 years after Superman 2. It's kind of the first of the big American studio, I think, movies where they sort of reset the chronology and take out films from the filmography that are embarrassing and just stick on the ones people like. Halloween is probably most famous for doing that. Godzilla had already done it twice at this point, by the way. So it's much like everything with franchises, Godzilla did it first. But he had already done it twice with 85 and the Millennium thing. But this, it doesn't, I don't know. This film probably should take place in 1985 and everyone's like talking about how awesome hair metal is all the time and, you know, how crazy it is that there's MTV and things like that. Like it's sort of, this film being a 50s sort of trying to look like a 50s movie sort of, but also having cell phones doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of this movie doesn't make sense, but it's sort of early aughts, big studio auteur superhero thing before the MCU and the cinematic universe thing sort of took over everything. It's a movie that loves the Christopher Reeve Superman, probably a bit too much, tries to reinvent it, but also not, does love Superman, but I don't think loves to wow the audience as much as it has a affinity for the Richard Donner films. Superman Returns is about Superman went to Krypton because an astronomer found out that there was remnants of Krypton. Superman then leaves Earth. It takes him 5 years to get there. Uses a spaceship thing in a scene they cut out, but I've heard is on the internet. I've seen that scene before, however. He goes there, and then everything changes in those, I believe it's 5 years, right? And when he comes back, Lois Lane has written a Pulitzer Prize winning article saying why the world doesn't need Superman. She also has a kid who's not 4 years old. I'm going to tell you that right now. But I can actually I mean, maybe he's not, but he doesn't look 4 to me. He looks like he's way too old to be this kid, but whatever. He's there. She's married to James Marsden. And he comes back. The world has changed. Lex Luthor is out of jail because they wanted Superman to testify, but he couldn't because he was like in space and stuff. So he didn't show up. And Lex Luthor's trying to do another basic real estate scam. So this is like two degrees away from Scooby-Doo. And he comes back and shows the world they do need Superman and to stop Lex Luthor's real estate earthquake nonsense yet again. So I went to film school from 2002 to 2006. Around the early 2000s, and literally like right after I left graduating high school, around I think the same week, I saw Spider-Man with my best friend Russ and my dad. And it felt like the cool directors between Spider-Man with Sam Raimi, Peter Jackson with Lord of the Rings, and Bryan Singer with the X-Men. These cool directors were taking on cool properties I liked throughout my childhood, and they were becoming mainstream entertainment. I do think the later part of when I was graduating film school, that all sort of fell the fuck apart. I think Sam Raimi's different, as Sam Raimi was already really a legend. He'd already made the Evil Dead movies. Like, you know, I think Singer and Jackson were more comparable. If you're thinking of the pop girlies, let's say Sam Raimi is Charlie XCX, and Bryan Singer and Peter Jackson are Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Roan. You can pick which one you want to be that. Sorry to one of them. Anyway, but I think this is very comparable to King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong, where it is a director who has an affinity for a certain franchise or character, has always wanted to make that movie, and then gets to make that movie because of the power that he has amassed from making a film that no one thought anyone could make and was successful. I think with Peter Jackson, obviously a much bigger deal with Lord of the Rings, and that was a much bigger achievement. But Bryan Singer with X-Men 2 is still, like, even if you watch it now, it's pretty good. Amazing that he got all those characters, and it looks a very hard thing to contain and make into a massive blockbuster. And he had launched the X-Men. So I think this was the crashing down because I was very reading Ain't It Cool News a lot, like everyone was, all that stuff. And this was the hype thing, much like Peter Jackson's King Kong. And much like that, I was super into these when they came out, and I watched them again at home and didn't like them. And I think it sort of changed how I felt about those directors. And then, you know, the filmography after was not as good, and it was a very coming down moment from being these cool guys. And Bryan Singer, actually, I went to School of Visual Arts. He went there for a couple of years. He'd come and talk. Nothing weird happened when to my knowledge. He was always very nice. He'd let me answer a lot of dorky X-Men comic questions. He was a nice guy. I understand what he's done since then. So I was very hyped for this. I loved the first two Richard Donner Superman movies. And I was excited. I love seeing, like, the titles be like the Christopher Reeves titles, or like the Richard Donner. I should call it Richard Donner. I apologize. I know Bryan Singer would call it the Richard Donner one, and that's really what they're doing. But I think the thing with this movie, and even at the time when I probably liked it a lot more than I do now, is this is not a return movie. It's called Superman Returns. But no one's seeing this, and even though it was very successful, actually outgrossed Batman Begins and did very well, no one's seeing this and going like, oh wow, I want to see another one of those. Did you see that amazing action sequence? And you're thinking, what amazing action sequence? Oh, the plane sequence? The plane sequence. Really? In the midpoint of the fucking movie? We're in, like, the 2000s action sequence? I mean, King Kong had enough cool stuff that you can sort of, like, lie to yourself. There's, like, huge sections with amazing action sequences. This movie has really just that, and then some stuff that's fine, like him using his cold breath on that fire thing and stuff. But it's really like there's no huge fight with Lex at the end. The third act set piece isn't great, and the romance they're pushing is not good enough to ignore that this movie is like an interesting, cool thought experiment by an auteur director who got a lot of power, and they spent way too much money on this fucking thing, which is why they didn't want to make another one. Really, it made a lot of money, but it cost way too much. I think it was like $250 million, something like that. So, you know, it really did. I don't think it was that successful. Batman Begins was not $250 million. And it just really, I think it is interesting, but interesting in a way that, like, why did you do this? I don't understand what you were thinking. It's sort of like, is so in love with the Donner stuff, it doesn't get like, well, why did you like Richard Donner's movies? It's not just like everyone says, you will see a man can fly, and I was part of it. But I was a kid who had already watched Star Wars when I saw Superman 2, which I watched. That one was my one as a kid. It was more like he fought with people, he flew, he did all this cool stuff. He, caught a helicopter in the first one. Like, he did a lot of things, right? It wasn't just like, look, he can fly and Lois sings a dumb poem or whatever. It was like there was more to it. And this is like Lois sings a dumb poem, the fucking movie. And I don't know. I find this to be very interesting, but it is just like not what I want from my Superman media. You want him to do all the cool stuff. You want to see the Man of Steel do all this stuff, and it had some sections, but it was too in love with the love story that I'm sorry doesn't work, because Brendan Routh, I actually really like him as Superman. I always thought it sort of stunk that he didn't get to have a bigger career other than that one part in Scott Pilgrim, and then he was in Dylan Dog, and he was on the CW once or whatever. I really have not seen him in that much. I've always thought has a good screen presence. Like when he does the plane thing and he said hi Lois and stuff, like he sells it. I was like, holy shit. Like there's so many times in this, I'm like, that's Superman. Like that, like I do not doubt that he's Superman. I feel bad for him. He's like, there's certain actors who get a like Pierce Brosnan, you're like, holy shit, you're James Bond. Sorry, you're only in one good Bond movie. I feel like you deserve more. And this is the same thing. Like Brendan Routh, it's like, oh man, it sucks that you're only in this one. And it's like, I don't know. The rest of the cast is interesting and very 2000s. Kal Penn, why does he not say anything? I know there's a backstory and he like tricks Superman and all this stuff, whatever, but like he never talks. I never understood that. I do like that Parker Posey's in this. I think more studio films should have used Parker Posey. She had a great indie screen presence and it seemed like Hollywood never fully took advantage of it other than here. Like Kate Bosworth, there were better actresses at the time. Like when I was watching, I guess Katie Holmes did Batman Begins, so she couldn't do this. And also, her farting thing. But or same with like there's so many actresses. Like Michelle Williams. What was Michelle Williams could have done this. Brokeback had just happened. Come on. They just like, I know she was recommended because of Kevin Spacey, but it just, I don't really like her as Lois Lane. And I think that really hurts it. Margot Kidder was great. I think they should have gotten someone else. I think that was bad casting. She never really became as much as I think Hollywood thought she would be, or her agents or whatever, but like, I just don't think she's very good in this. James Marsden's very solid as James Marsden. Donut Lord is always good. Kevin Spacey, kind of perfect casting, but this is sort of like the Superman movie presented to you by two infamous sex pests, which is like much grosser now. People really liked Kevin Spacey, I will say. Back then, and for a long time up until the allegations came out. And same with Bryan Singer, even though that was like, I will say it was always whispered about with Singer. The only part though I did say gross is when I saw Richard Branson as an astronaut. So, because I was ready for Spacey and Singer. I did not expect a billionaire. That's fucking gross. I like Frank Langella as Perry White. I think they wanted House or Hugh Laurie because House is a Bryan Singer produced show and all that. And 20th Century Fox's war with Bryan Singer was a thing, and they wouldn't let him go, and that's why Cyclops dies in X-Men 3 because he was in that. So it's like that was never going to happen, unfortunately. Although I think he would have been a good Perry White. Someone should do that eventually. I actually like the cast for the most part, and Eva Marie Saint, who was she in a Superman thing? I couldn't. Anyway, I like that she was in this regardless. I just wish, I think what you like about X-Men 2 is that Singer understood the material, the comp. He really did. I mean, I actually asked him about the Claremont run and John Byrne, and I honestly think if he had done the Man of Steel comics that John Byrne had done, which I haven't read in a long time, but if he had done that, I actually think he could have made a really cool movie because he was very good at doing the Claremont X-Men stuff. And I think doing a John Byrne Superman would have been a great move. But instead, he's so in love with this stuff and doing another real estate scam. Really, the problem is, it's if you're hyped up to see this and you watch Superman the movie and Superman 2, and then you see this, you're like, didn't we do that? It does feel very Force Awakens. You're like, oh, another Death Star. Neat. I don't know. It just his whole plan, I guess it was more nefarious. It's what if the real estate thing is even worse? And you're like, I mean, okay, dude. I really do not understand the 5-year thing, and we're in 2006. That is just so jarring to me rewatching it. I was like, why is this? I would have liked if it was 85. Why was it not 85 if you're going to do that concept? It feels like a total failure of what you're trying to do. That would have been interesting. What would it have been had we not had Superman 4 and Superman 3, and there was just this mid-movie, and it was a lot better. I feel like he could have done that, but he doesn't. I do find it interesting. It was nice looking back, but ultimately, I think this is kind of a mess. And not maybe the way Man of Steel I didn't like because of its meanness and how harsh it played Superman and all that stuff. But in this one, I'm watching and just thinking I think you wanted to go for a Titanic audience, and I think this movie would actually, if they were to make a superhero movie like this now, people would be surprised and into it. But it's just not the right time. it's not really that good of a Superman movie. Like, I guess it's better than 3, but like, at least Richard Pryor is funny in that one. I really like Brendan Routh as Superman. I think he is that character. I think that was a great casting decision, but it just doesn't really work. And it is weird to see auteur superhero movies in this degree, which I think the DC stuff is more associated with auteurs getting to create the world than the Marvel stuff, which is weird, but okay. Like having this much control, and I think Marvel is better at working with the auteur within the universe, and DC's just like, go off. And then you're watching this movie and you're like, oh, maybe you should have reined it in a lot. I think Nolan was better utilizing that and understanding it. But the theory of this is like a mess. Like the time-wise thing doesn't make sense. I know that's a complaint everyone has, but like throughout it, I was like, why didn't you just make it the mid-'80s? Like, I think that would have been cool. I don't know. I know the 80s weren't the 80s were coming back. I don't know. It's just like, there's so many bad theories within it. It doesn't really work. It like ends with like, uh-oh, Lex is on a desert island. And you're just like, what? Like, it's just weird. And like, then he like throws the kryptonite thing that weakens him. And like, I don't know. Even like, my dad's never really a guy who complains about superhero movie logic that much. And I remember he saw it like a year later or something. And like my phone call was him like, but if he's allergic to kryptonite, how can he carry the landmass to space? That doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, no, he was so strong with like his love for creating humanity. And then I was like, it really hit me. This movie sucks. I just don't think it really works. I think there's huge screenwriting and audience expectation problems that like, if you're going to make a trailer where a bullet hits his eye and bounces and the plane and all that cool stuff, and this is the movie you deliver, it's just disappointing. You know, everyone's like, oh, it's actually good. I don't think that. I think it is okay and interesting that Singer got to be a huge auteur. I wish he had done a Star Trek movie since he's so influenced by Wrath of Khan. It's like insane. That I don't think will happen now, and I wish it had happened back then because he would have made the traditional Star Trek movie. That would have been great. But he didn't. He made this. I think it was honestly sort of a mistake, and probably why his career, like, you know, it's like Valkyrie, you know, kind of interesting. You get Jack, it just feels like his career gets adrift after this and never really becomes what it was before, which was like he was really one of the big directors and interesting, and then, you know, he becomes the Bohemian Rhapsody guy. And this, to me, signals more of the future to come, that he would be the Bohemian Rhapsody guy and not the guy who made X-Men 2. And this is sort of the thing. Much like with Peter Jackson and King Kong, he sort of doesn't become the cool director, the horror director who got to do Lord of the Rings. That was like Peter Jackson. And then he does King Kong. You're like, well, now you're the big Hollywood director who makes bloated movies I have to make excuses for if I pretend I like and stuff. It just doesn't, you know, it's like, I don't want Lovely Bones guy. I want Lord of the Rings, and I want X-Men. And like, I feel like they didn't understand. They understood what they liked about the material. They did not understand what we liked about it. And I think maybe why Nolan, who, you know, the Batman Begins was right around this time, and Dark Knight was 2 years after this, regardless of how you feel about it, at least understood what people wanted from his superhero and is able to do a compelling narrative and have all those big things while also telling a good story. And Superman Returns just doesn't do that. I like Brendan Routh. I wish he was in a better movie. But unfortunately, the movie he was in was this. And Superman did return, but unfortunately, we all sort of forgot about it. And hopefully, where Superman goes after this with the new one is in a much better place, because this was just, it was nice to be reminded of Christopher Reeves, but I don't really watch it and will never treasure it as much as Christopher Reeves, because I don't know if it really treasured me being into it as an audience member, and certainly didn't treasure itself and try to be an actual solid movie. It was just, you know, you really like Richard Donner. I really like Richard Donner. I really like Richard Donner too. But I feel like if I really like Richard Donner, this does not make me like Richard Donner more. I'd much rather watch a Richard Donner movie than watch this, which I guess these kind of movies always do. But this one, I don't really want to revisit. Again, it just, you know, maybe he returned, but I think it's, you know, oh cool, you came back, and I don't know if really anyone wanted a sequel to this nonsense because it didn't really seem to understand why we would want him to return in the first place. So if you've seen Superman Returns and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.